Testing. 1, 2, 3. Well, welcome to the Kensington Redondo Beach. Yay. We are so excited to have all of you here this evening. There's been so much warmth, there's been so many smiles, and tonight is a special evening. We want to first thank our sponsors that have helped us make this night a brilliant one. So just a round of applause to all those sponsors that are helping us tonight. We have close to, I think, 350 guests joining us. Yes. So if anybody needs a little space or needs another seat, we have little satellite pods here to make sure everybody feels really comfortable. So let me just tell you a little bit about Kensington Senior Living. My name's Tanya Walker. I'm the executive director here. And my job, along with all the team members, are to care and love for our residents as our own family. And we really take that to heart. And we have many of our residents joining us here today, and thank you. They are the heart of our community as well as our team. So as we get started, we are going to bring you a beautiful evening filled with inspiration and information on brain health. We have two renowned scientists, Dr. Gill and Dr. Siegel Gideon, and they both join us with our honor. Our host is Miss Maria, and I'm so excited for you to meet her shortly. Maria is known for not only her work as an award-winning television journalist, but she's also a New York Times bestseller, a proud mother of 4, and a world-leading Alzheimer's activist and advocate. And we are just so proud to have her here with us this evening, and you'll get to meet her in a little bit. But before we get started, I'm really excited. I know there's a lot of great energy here. We're going to have someone that's going to settle our brain waves and get us in a calm, nice space so we can just get our learning receptors going. And I'm proud to announce that Geraldine Glass is going to take the lead on giving us those great wavelengths tonight. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Geraldine, and she's here, right here, and we're really excited, and she's going to take us on a little journey.
Thank you very much, Tanya. So, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was the sound, and the sound was creation. So every culture, from the Aborigines 80,000 years ago who used sound from their didgeridoos to mend broken bones and heal the body, to the ancient Egyptians who had sound healing chambers, to the South American shamans who used their rattles and their drums to bring healing, to ancient India, which worked with the chakra system, each chakra having its own tone. Sound has been a viable healing modality since the beginning of time. So I invite you to take deep breath with me and just tone the sound of ah. So just ah. Just let any stress that you've accumulated today, any place where you might have pain in your body, just ah. Ah is the vowel of the heart. So I invite you to close your eyes if you feel like it, or you can leave them open. But we're going to find the place where we activate and unite our body, mind, and our spirits. So sound medicine has the capacity to go even beyond where words, human touch, and medicines can go. Sound takes us into the place of the ineffable. allowing yourself to come home, coming home. Breathing peace in your body, peace in your mind. You're in store for an amazing evening.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you, Geraldine. Hope everyone feels calm and zen. So now I want to take you on our next journey. And this journey is to open your heart and open your mind and learn from an individual who is a Kensington partner, a Kensington friend, and an individual that's going to help us understand why it's so important for us to partner on this Alzheimer's journey and to learn more about the support and research that's in our community. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Lisa Bricker.
Hello there. It is such a delight and an honor to be in your presence this evening. I am a friend of the Kensington, and professionally I wear many hats. I am an Alzheimer's and dementia placement specialist. I work with many families, helping them find new homes for their loved ones with memory issues. I also am an elder care consultant, and I also have the pleasure of leading the Alzheimer's and Dementia Support Group at the Kensington in Sierra Madre near Pasadena. Personally, Alzheimer's runs very deep with me. My husband, Gary, has Alzheimer's. Gary and I have been on a long journey for 14 years now. Gary was in his mid-50s when his symptoms started. We had no idea what was going on. It was confusing and frustrating. It took over 5 years for him to get a diagnosis. And during that time, he lost 2 jobs as an attorney, and we moved 4 times in 3 years. There are so many stories to share. I have Alzheimer's on both sides of my family, Alzheimer's and different types of dementia, and Gary has none. This disease knows no boundaries and no limits. About 6 years ago, I had to call 911 on myself for stress and heart palpitations. I was in the hospital for 2 nights, and the cardiologist said, "You're lucky this time, but next time you may not be so lucky. You need to make some changes." And I did. That was my wake-up call. And it is my mission and my passion to share my stories so that people out there know that they're not alone on their journey. We have a very exciting evening in store for you. And you are about to meet Maria Shriver. Maria is the biggest advocate in the world for Alzheimer's. And we're going to have some very good information, important information that we're going to learn about this disease. We need to. It's so important. But before Maria comes on, we're going to watch a short video together. Thank you so much for being here.
I'd like to ask you to think about everything you have ever learned in your entire life. Think about every memory you have created, every experience you've ever had. Think about your family, your friends, their names, their faces. Now close your eyes and imagine losing it all. I mean, all of it, a clean slate. Welcome to the world of Alzheimer's.
It is a relentless beast.
When you're in your 50s and 60s being diagnosed, it's a tragedy.
I was 36 years old when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It felt like my world was ending.
When someone in your family has Alzheimer's, the whole family has Alzheimer's.
I mean, there's some days I don't even get out of bed till 11 or 12 o'clock. I think my kids feel like they've lost a little bit of me, and they're scared.
And that's why the Women's Alzheimer's Movement exists, to help women like Pam Montana and the millions of other people confronting this devastating, mind-blowing disease. Our mission at WHAM is to understand why every 65 seconds a new brain develops Alzheimer's and why 2 out of 3 of them belong to women.
It's still a mystery why more women get Alzheimer's than men. Is it the hormones, estrogen? Is it the menopause transition that put women on the fast track, but men may be more protected? The honest answer is we just don't know.
We are funding women-based research at leading institutions. We are agitating and instigating at every level for doctors to be better educated and scientists to learn more, so they can change the trajectory of this disease.
WHAM has absolutely been imperative to help us press the fast forward button on Alzheimer's research.
The best cure for Alzheimer's is actually prevention. It's our brains, it's our future, it's our cure.
From the initial clarion call in the Shriver report informing the nation for the very first time that women were more likely to get Alzheimer's than men, to every other media platform since, WHAM has educated people about how to become change makers in their own homes, communities, and places of business, and advocated on behalf of families living with the disease.
Alzheimer's is the greatest public health crisis that my generation has to face.
If we as a generation knew what we were going to get ourselves into in the future, I think there would be more of a push into trying to figure out how this could be stopped. We have to find an answer.
At WHAM, we believe Alzheimer's can be stopped, but only if we invest in research. Only if we all push government and business leaders to respond more urgently and creatively to this crisis. And only if we all take charge of our physical and cognitive health and the health of our loved ones.
We're going to beat this disease. We're going to protect our brains. We're going to figure out why this happens, and we're going to intervene early. That's the future of Alzheimer's disease.
WHAM is a movement of committed women who fund research and spread the power that comes with being informed. We are powerful change makers who will not stop until the change we envision is realized for all. Women's Alzheimer's Movement is committed to ending Alzheimer's. The more we push, the more the needle will move. So join us in pushing the needle and wiping out Alzheimer's once and for all. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Get up here. Good evening. Good evening. Hi, I'm Maria, and I'm very happy to be in this beautiful place and in this beautiful space with all of you beautiful people who are committed, I know, to finding a cure for Alzheimer's, committed to caring for people you love, and committed to your own brain health, which is, I hope, what we're all here doing tonight. I want to thank Tanya for inviting us and everybody involved with Kensington. This is a beautiful place that you have built, and I hope that many people will find the love and care that they deserve by being here. I want to thank Susan, who has connected us, who has been a great friend of Wham's. Susan has a company called Rivet Revolution. They make jewelry that benefits different Alzheimer's associations and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. And she's also a daughter of Alzheimer's like myself. And she has been a great partner for us in this. Geraldine, where are you? I mean, I was 2 hours in traffic, which I'm sure many other people were coming down here. And I have to say a few four-letter words came out of my mouth. But not too many, but a few. And so that was exactly what I needed. It brought us all down, it made us feel home, and I want to thank you for being here and lending your talent to this evening tonight. Lisa, you took my breath away standing up here. Your honesty, your story, your vulnerability, your courage in saying, I called 911 on myself. That's the truth of Alzheimer's. Every 65 seconds, a new brain develops Alzheimer's. 2/3 of those brains belong to women. And as you heard in the video, when Alzheimer's comes into a family, it doesn't just affect the person who gets Alzheimer's, it affects Lisa and everybody else in the family. So this is a national crisis. It's a personal crisis, a political crisis, a professional crisis, and it's a people crisis. And it's one that I believe 100% that we can solve. I've been 16 years on the ground working in this space. My father got Alzheimer's in 2003, and he was, as I've often said, the smartest human being on the planet. He came out of this head. He conceived of the Peace Corps, the Job Corps, legal services for the poor, foster grandparents, the war on poverty, you name it. And together with my mother, who also created the Special Olympics, the two of them were brains on fire. And to watch somebody like that no longer know what their nose was, their mouth was, or who their child was is an extraordinary thing to witness. And watching that, I made a commitment that I would do everything I could in my power to make sure that no other family went through what we went through. And we went through it with finances. I didn't have to make a 911 call. But millions and millions and millions, in the vast majority of Americans and really around the world, don't have that ability. So they end up bankrupt, they end up calling 911, and they end up making really hard, painful decisions. And so my goal and the mission of Wham is to understand, first and foremost, why women are more vulnerable to Alzheimer's, what is happening in women's brains that's different. And I do believe that that's smart, not sexist, because I think we can learn a lot by studying women. We have incredible gender research gap in this country because most medications and practically all research has been done on white men. And so we're trying to close that gap. And with that research gap comes a knowledge gap. So WHAM is committed as best as it can to closing that gap, but we're also trying to help men and people of color and different communities. So it's a broad mission, but it's also a focused mission. And so I'm thrilled that up here tonight we are joined by two people who are on the front lines of what I call humanity, because this is really about human beings. And Dr. Josh Grill is at UCI Irvine, and we have been funding Josh. Josh, come on up. And I'm really excited about his work, and I'm hopeful that he will bring you some answers tonight. Come on, sit down here. You can sit down. And Dr. Freddie Siegel Ganan, right? Did I do that? Is also at USC and also working in research on Alzheimer's. And I'm going to begin by interviewing both of them, and then we're going to open this up to questions. Questions you can ask them, questions you can ask me. We can talk about all the different cutting edge research that's going on, caregiving, or you can ask me about my own personal experiences and how you could perhaps get involved with WHAM. But the bottom line is this incredible place, most families don't have the benefit of coming to an incredible place like this. That's the truth. So this is as good as you get, and this should be available to all people who need it. And I'm really hopeful. I was talking to Freddie, and I said to her when we came in here, what do you think is the single most important thing we can talk about tonight or say tonight from your point of view? And she said, well, we haven't had the money really from the government that we really need in this disease. And I said, well, money always follows political power. And political power comes from grassroots power. That means everybody in this room. I've spent a lot of my life in Washington. I grew up as a child of politics, and politicians follow the will of the people. So I hope you will take notes tonight. I hope you will see yourself as advocates in this fight. The one thing we all have in common is we all have a brain. Every single person in this room has a brain. And I'm sure every single person in this room wants to keep their brain working as long as possible. So I think it's fitting that on World Mental Health Awareness Day, we're talking about the health of our brains and the disease that is ravaging brains here in this country and around the world. So let me begin with that. So Josh, what is the most exciting thing you think is going on right now? Because there's always so much depressing stuff when it comes to Alzheimer's. I'm sure you hear all the time about trials that failed and companies that bow out. But I'm excited and I'm hopeful. And as I said, I've been here 16 years and I'm more hopeful today than I've ever been. And am I right to be that hopeful?
I think you're always right.
I wish I could find a man like that. I mean, what the heck? What the? Okay.
So,
Excuse us. He's married with little children, don't worry. Okay.
And I think you're right to be hopeful. And like you, I'm also hopeful. Because I think that we do see headlines about failures. Mm-hmm. And I think to some extent those headlines are somewhat misconceptions of where we are as a field. We've had some setbacks, but we're still in our infancy. We're in a modern age of Alzheimer's disease research that's only a couple decades old, whereas cardiovascular disease and cancer, we've been studying these things for 100 plus years. So we're learning at a remarkably accelerated rate. And I think we know so much more than we knew a decade ago. And I'm utterly hopeful about where we are as a field. And that comes from advocacy and increased research dollars. And I do believe that many of the things we heard in the video are spot on accurate. We understand more about this disease, including that it lasts a long time. And it begins long before the diagnosis of Alzheimer's dementia is made.
So explain that to people, because so often
Happily.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is when I go around the country, people think, well, I'll think about that when I'm 65 or 70.
Yeah.
And the time to start thinking about Alzheimer's is when you're 30 and 40. And explain why that is.
Well, there's numerous reasons, including that we certainly now understand and appreciate that our lifestyle approach to the way we treat our bodies and the way we treat our brains begins in middle age, if not in young adulthood, and has serious repercussions to our late life brain health. And so every study that has had the ability to look at midlife cardiovascular risk factors or head traumas or sleep patterns consistently finds associations with late life cognitive performance and how we treat our brains throughout our lives. So it's both never too early to start thinking about brain health and also never too late to try to do something about ensuring brain health later in life.
And we'll talk about some of the steps before we leave here. And I think everybody's getting a brain guide in their packet that we've worked on that gives you steps that you can do to take care of your brain. Freddie, I think, when I first started in Alzheimer's research, I started asking about, aren't there more women getting it? And everybody told me, no, you're not right, you're crazy, it's only because women live longer. And of course, we now know that's not true. We do know women are more vulnerable, and we're beginning to find a lot of studies studying sex differences. Why is that important? What's exciting about that to you?
Well, I think that the excitement is multi-leveled. First of all, there's more women leading research. So that's a big step. More women as research scientists, more women as clinicians who are saying these are important questions. And I think we do know that women's brains work differently than men's brains. And we don't know exactly why that is. Why are women more empathetic in general? Why do women tend to be more intuitive sometimes? And there may be difference in the connections. There was a recent preliminary study at a international meeting that was here in Los Angeles on Alzheimer's disease that showed that there may be more connections in pathways in women's brains, and those connections may actually lead to more development of some of the abnormal proteins that are involved in Alzheimer's disease. So women may be predisposed for the propagation of some of the proteins. Alzheimer's is due to two proteins that create the brain. People have heard of tangles and plaques.
Right.
And plaques are made from one protein, amyloid, and tangles are made from another protein, tau. And there's some, tau tends to act like an infective agent. It starts and then it just runs through the brain. And there's some evidence from this preliminary study that women's brains may allow tau to move more quickly. Maybe it is also that premenopause, estrogen stops that. And maybe postmenopause without estrogen, it allows that to happen. Similarly to heart disease, where there's a protective element of heart disease prior to menopause, and then after menopause, heart disease tends to ramp up in women, and so maybe some of the same messengers may be involved.
I think what was interesting is that Lisa said that Alzheimer's runs in her family, not in her husband's family, and yet it was her husband that got Alzheimer's. One of the big misconceptions that I also find when I travel around the country is that people say to me, oh my God, it runs in my family, I'm definitely gonna get it. And then other people say to me, I don't even need to hear about Alzheimer's because it doesn't run in my family. That's such a big misconception.
Yeah. Yeah, no one's safe when thinking about the risk for Alzheimer's disease. And
pause a second. So that's a really big thing that Josh just said. Nobody is safe, which means all of us should be engaged and can be engaged in taking care of this starting today.
yeah. I mean, we understand so much more now, including what puts someone at risk to get Alzheimer's disease. And overwhelmingly, the strongest risk factor is age. So my number one recommendation is always to tell people to stop aging.
But it's a privilege to age. So the goal is, how do we age elegantly, gracefully, and intact? Right again.
You set them up and I knock them down. So aside from age, we understand that about half the risk for Alzheimer's disease is genetic, which is why some people think, it's in my family and I'm destined to get it. But half of the risk is lifestyle. And the genetic story is complicated. We can't do a gene test and say who will and who will not get Alzheimer's disease. And even some of the genes seem to be more potent in women than they are in men. And there's now more than 25 genes that have been identified as playing a role, most of them with a small impact and relative infrequency in the population. So there's a lot of work left to be done. We can't put it all into an equation and say who should and should not worry about this. And again, we all should worry about this.
You said that one of the biggest predictor was age, but then you said also it's lifestyle.
Yeah.
What should people in this room, all 350 people who have a brain, what can they do regarding their lifestyle today?
Well, so the main things I generally recommend are thinking about getting your physical exercise. We know that exercise is a wonderful intervention for brain health, and it does numerous things, including increasing blood flow, causing the birth of new blood vessels, even causing the birth of new brain cells. Eating a healthy diet, and that includes avoiding things that are high in fat and cholesterol and put our brain at risk, but also eating healthy things like fish and dark green leafy vegetables that may lower our risk. And then one that I think we're really tremendously appreciating more now is to get a good night's sleep. There's a new system that's been identified in the last 5 years called the glymphatic system, and it cleans our brain. It's most active when we sleep, and one of the things it cleans is the beta amyloid protein that accumulates in the plaques of the brain of Alzheimer's disease. So we can all lead a brain healthy lifestyle by thinking about cardiovascular risk, engaging our brain mentally and physically, and getting a good night's sleep.
So we hear a lot, Freddie, about the role of inflammation, and I know we're working on that with you, Josh. People, when I talk about inflammation, or some people saying, you know, Alzheimer's is connected to inflammation, they're like, what does that actually mean to me?
So inflammation is a response to the body, a normal response to the body to an irritation. And so arthritis involves inflammation of the joints. And so the brain responds to an irritation with inflammation. We believe that it's a response to what's happening in the brain, not a cause. But there is some evidence that people who don't have inflammatory responses have less problems with Alzheimer's. So interesting study is that it's largely women who get rheumatoid arthritis and take large doses of anti-inflammatory medication have very low rates of Alzheimer's disease.
Repeat that.
So women,
well, I like to stress things that are headlines.
It's a strange fact, but it's been proven, shown over and over again in epidemiological studies that people who take regular large doses of anti-inflammatory, like ibuprofen, or sometimes prednisone even, and are on those drugs for many, many years because they have a very aggressive inflammatory condition, rheumatoid arthritis, have very low rates of Alzheimer's disease, right? So not that you'd want to have rheumatoid arthritis,
right.
But that's inferred that there's some inflammatory pathway that is being blocked that may be something that we have to look at in Alzheimer's disease.
And that's really important, and unfortunately there have been some really large studies to test whether taking anti-inflammatory drugs can prevent Alzheimer's disease, and that's never been suggested even remotely by those clinical trials that people should take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in hopes of staving off Alzheimer's disease.
So the brain supplement business has become a multi-billion-dollar business, and I bet there's a lot of people in here listening to commercials about helping people with their memory and with their focus and that sort of stuff. What's your theory on that? What would you be advocating? Have you studied that at all? And it's not FDA approved, I should mention.
Yeah.
When you get supplements and they tell you it's going to improve your focus and your memory, those are not FDA approved supplements. I actually take them, but I do. I'm up for anything, but
and actually the FDA issued 12 warning letters last year around supplements being marketed for Alzheimer's indications which were not appropriate. This is a big business. You know, my recommendation to people is to exercise and eat a healthy diet. There's no evidence to support the use of supplements to prevent Alzheimer's disease or treat it. I'm also the principal investigator of a clinical trial of a high-dose vitamin as a potential treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And there are things in the laboratory that people point to, and they deserve to be tested. Until the evidence from rigorous studies suggests there's a benefit, we would never recommend a supplement. But you know, a healthy diet, making sure you have adequate amounts of these things, and importantly, if you're deficient in certain things in your diet, then your clinician may want you to take supplements to bring you back to normal levels.
So we're really, and I think that begs the question that so many people I also speak to say that they go to their doctor never talks to them about their brain health. Most women I talk to say, I got a mammogram and a pap smear, I'm good. And that we don't really have doctors who are asking us, how is your cognitive health? Would you like to take a cognitive baseline test? So many people come up and say, or we heard Lisa say, like, we didn't know, it took us 5 years to get a diagnosis, and you hear that over and over again. So what should people here know about what they should be telling their doctors? Because I'm a big believer that you have to be in charge. You have to advocate for yourself or your loved one, because your doctor's got 5 or 10 minutes and they're not going to ask you. Am I wrong? No, I'm not. I know I'm not. No.
We already went over that.
Unless
went
you
over
live in a
that,
different
yeah.
universe.
But she's a girl. I don't know. Maybe she wanted to say I'm wrong. But what can, and I know we also we're working on that, what you need to ask your doctor, but what could everybody in here be armed with when they leave here?
Well, I think just like people get their blood pressure checked, we ought to have a cognitive check. We ought to have a brain check, a brain health check.
And explain what that is so people might not know what a cognitive baseline test is.
So it can be as simple as asking somebody to draw a clock and remember 3 words. Okay? It can be as simple as being aware, asking somebody, can you tell me what you do during your day? And can they tell you what they do during their day? And if someone can't tell you what they do during their day, then maybe they're having problems remembering. So it's raising everybody's awareness. Clinicians' awareness, so clinicians to be aware, that pharmacists to be aware if somebody's missing their medications, their refills, to say maybe you need to get a brain check. Also, Medicare, for people over 65, requires has an annual wellness exam, and that annual wellness exam is supposed to have a cognitive assessment. Now, they haven't decided what that should be, but if you have Medicare, then you should be getting a wellness exam every year. You pay, that's what your insurance says you should get under Medicare. And as when you get your blood pressure check, you should say, what about my brain? What are you going to do?
And they'll usually be met with, we don't know, what do you want us to do?
Yeah. Well, you're the provider. You're supposed to know. Maybe I should find somebody who does. I mean, I believe that memory testing, just basic assessment and memory testing doesn't require any more knowledge or skills than learning how to use a stethoscope to listen to a heart or learning how to take a blood pressure. And it can be done by a medical assistant trained to do it in an office. It just has to be someone set up for that.
I think I totally agree with everything Freddie is saying. I think the unfortunate thing is that it's clear that this isn't happening at the rate we want it to happen, or even that Medicare suggests it should happen. And so I think the other thing we frequently recommend to families is that if you're worried about brain health in your family, you want to find someone like Freddie. You want to find someone who does this for a living and really understands the aging brain and can give a thorough workup to understand whether someone has a reversible cognitive impairment or maybe on the path toward Alzheimer's dementia. And we know that there are treatment nihilists out there, that there are people who say, you don't have good enough therapies for me to offer my patients, so I'm not going to make this diagnosis.
Yeah.
And
that's a real issue.
It is absolutely a real issue, and we are working really hard to fix it by developing better treatments. Short of that, there's still incredible value to a diagnosis being made as early as possible, because as we've heard from Lisa, from you, from others, this is a long journey, and there's a plan that needs to be made, and the earlier that plan is made, the better.
So let's talk about it. You were saying, what people need to know about if they get a Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis, that it's going to be a long journey, and everybody's journey is different. Lisa's journey is different from mine, and for other people in here. So many people I talk to say, I don't want to know if I have mild cognitive impairment. And so many young people I talk to say, I think my mom or my dad might have some issues, but I say something to them and they're like, I'm fine, nothing's fine. And I actually go, you're fine, because I don't want to know either, and because there really isn't any hope, so we're all walking around in denial. And so why are we wrong to be walking around in denial?
Well, some people live in denial. It's a nice place to live for a while until something bad happens.
Right.
So, it's a nice place to live until the person in denial is driving the car that goes through the restaurant and kills a bunch of people, unfortunately, or it's nice to live in denial until your parents are scammed out of their money because they're not managing their money correctly, or they're in denial until they mess up their medications and they have an event and wind up in the hospital. Bad things happen when you don't recognize something that could have lots of harmful events. So early recognition allows one to plan. It also allows the individual with the disease to be part of the plan. Not the people around them, but the person who has the disease. Early on in this disease, the person feels fine, and they can express their wishes, and they can be engaged in telling you what they want. I mean, what they
So
want
how do
for
you
the
start that?
future.
We're coming up on Thanksgiving, let's just say, and these are times when families get together and people have conversations. How do you begin to have conversations if you're, let's say, in your 30s or 40s and your parents might be in their 70s, or if you're in your 60s and 70s and you want to talk to your children about, you know, what you would like, how would you like to come to Kensington? Would you like to stay at home? What do you want to do? Do you have any finances? Who's going to pay for your care? What do you want? How do you initiate these kinds of conversations?
Well, usually it's best to start off with, I really love you. You know, I really love you, and I hope you're going to be around for a really long time, you know, and I want to be here to help you as you age, but I need to know some things so that if something happens, I'm prepared. I think that opens up the conversation. The other is to, you know, ask people simple questions first. Do you have a will? Do you have you ever filled out an advance directive, power of attorney, saying what you want? And if so, you know, can we look at that and share that? So not threatening, not like, you know, you're old and no, you know, that's very threatening, but more from a place of love, you know, and caring. And I think most people want their families to be involved, you know.
So one of the things that I've also been doing, I talked a little bit about the gender research gap that we have in this country, and which leads us to a gender knowledge gap, and trying to get more people, women in particular, into clinical trials, because Alzheimer's will be cured, or we will find answers if people go into clinical trials. And the big kind of breakthroughs in these clinical trials is that you're now doing trials with younger people. When I started in Alzheimer's, you were looking at people with advanced Alzheimer's, and they were only looking at plaques and tangles. Now the cast a very wide net, and you're looking for people in their 50s and 60s. And so why would you advocate for somebody here to join a clinical trial? How will that help you? And how will that help them?
So I think people participate in clinical trials primarily for 3 reasons. They trust the people doing the clinical trial, they want to help medicine and science, and they want to benefit. And I think all 3 happen when people enroll in trials. We establish incredible relationships with the people enrolled in our studies, and they have a lot of access to us. And so if something happens, if there's a breakthrough, they're first in line to learn about those things. They benefit even when the trial fails, because we're assessing health, you know, month in, month out. And most importantly, we're not going to achieve our mission unless a lot of people sign up to help us. And as you point out, we're doing clinical trials in a more aggressive way than ever before, trying to identify people when they're younger and perhaps on the path to Alzheimer's disease, but have very subtle memory problems or perhaps perfect memories, to see if we can prevent their memory from ever getting worse and prevent them from ever getting a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease.
So how would somebody get involved in a clinical trial that you're working on?
Well, at UCI Mind, they could enroll in our registry, which is called the Consent to Contact Registry, or c2c.uci.edu.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Just say it again. Contact. Everybody's going to get it. That went right by me. Simple.
So we and other groups around the country have started registries.
Okay.
Ours is called the Consent to Contact Registry, but it's just c2c.uci.edu. But there are other registries that are national. There are registries run by different groups around the country. And this is one step that researchers like us are taking so that people who are interested in helping have a place to go to say, you know what, I'm interested. If there's a study that's right for me, I want to be contacted about it. And I
That's
want
when you go to the registry, you can just sign
go
up.
online, and so for ours, for example, we ask about 20 minutes worth of questions that people tell us if they had a parent with Alzheimer's disease or currently have a parent with Alzheimer's disease, the medications they take, and if they'd be willing to do things like a brain scan or cognitive tests, which are essential to the studies that we're doing now that are really aggressive efforts to see if we can test promising, sometimes risky therapies that we hope will be able to stave off dementia. And if we can find a drug that delays the onset of Alzheimer's disease by 5 years, we could cut the total number of cases in half.
And you could save the country billions of dollars and save families, hundreds of thousands, or save families from going bankrupt.
Yeah, the estimate of the cost to a family of having someone in your family with Alzheimer's disease is about $300,000 for the course of this disease.
And that's just financial. We're not even talking about what happened with Lisa, the emotional toll, the physical toll, the spiritual toll.
And we should talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the stress, the burden that a person is on when they're providing care to a loved one with Alzheimer's disease is tremendous. It's taxing, it's accumulating over time, and it puts their health at risk.
One of the other things that I like to, since we're sitting in a place like Kensington, is that so many families I have found struggle with the decision to put a loved one in a place like this, even though it's a beautiful place, right? That people feel a sense of guilt, a sense of shame that they can't or couldn't do it and continue to do it. And I think Lisa, kind of talked a little bit when you get to a place that you're calling 911 on yourself, and we talk a lot about telling caregivers to care for themselves. You work with families all the time on the ground. Can you help walk us through that in any way, and how personal that is and how non-judgmental we should be?
Yeah, so one of the advantages I have is that I see people long term. So I can develop relationships with people from the time of diagnosis and start talking about what this journey is going to be like and what is the person's preference. Most people say, I want to stay home. I want to be in my home. And yes, that may be what you would like, but maybe it's not the best place at some point for you. So if it's, and I opened that conversation with, if it wasn't possible for you to be at home, if the person's early on, if it comes to that point where you can no longer stay home because it's not safe for you or it's not safe for your spouse or your family, what would your other options be? So start talking about it early so it's not seen as something not possible. I also say to people early on, no one person can take care of another person with Alzheimer's disease long term by themselves. It's just not possible. You can't, even with the best care and the best intentions, people with Alzheimer's disease today, with what we know and our limited array of medications that really don't do much, are going to get worse. With the best care, people with Alzheimer's still devolve. And it's hard, and it's not gratifying as a caregiver. You put your heart and soul into caring for somebody, and they're not getting better. And you want to care for somebody, you want them to get better. When you raise a child, you do your best and you see them developing. But even with the best of care, people with Alzheimer's and other dementias continue over time to get worse. Good care actually allows people to live longer. There's a whole ethical issue. Is that good?
There's approximately 17, or the stats on it are about 17, 18 million doing unpaid caregiving in the Alzheimer's space. Add into that Parkinson's, other forms of dementia, special needs. We have about 60 million Americans, 2/3 of whom are women, doing unpaid caregiving in this country. So this is a huge political issue. And I think this is something you can vote on. You can vote on people who have caregiving platforms. You can vote for people who want to increase funding at NIH. You can ask these questions. I'm always quite stunned that it's not a bigger political issue than it is. And I think, is that because we're not advocating properly? What do you need from us?
Well, I think you are doing an amazing job of advocating. I think,
I just want to shout out Ashley and Dolores over here, who are huge funders of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement and the work at UCI Mine. And it's because of people like them who step up and their funding through, we're a vessel, but because they believe, right? So, and not everybody can fund at the level they're funding, which is extraordinary, but all of us can do something.
I do believe all of us can do something, but I think this is a really big issue, and advocacy can mean a lot of different things. You know, you alluded to it being National Mental Health Day, and we think of mental health disorders of having a bad stigma.
Right.
Well, Alzheimer's has a stigma, and it's going to take a sea change to change the culture of that stigma. And that's going to make it easier to have those conversations with a loved one. It's going to make it easier for asking politicians what their plan is. And there have been some important milestones in advocacy. And in 2012, we passed the National Alzheimer's Project Act. So it said that we had to have a plan as a nation for dealing with the swelling aging population and the number of caregivers and the dire need for increased research funding. And then I think that, you know, in California now we have a task force that you've created to deal with the aging population in California, and specifically for Alzheimer's disease in California. So jump on the opportunities to be an advocate, help participate in this sea change of changing the way we think about Alzheimer's disease. This is a disease of the brain. You know, we had to change the stigma of cancer. And it's nobody's fault when someone gets cancer. It's nobody's fault when someone gets Alzheimer's disease. And we really have to change our culture as a society on these things to really move the needle. And I think we are moving in that direction.
So we're going to open this. That also involves changing the culture on aging. Because if we don't want to say our age, we don't want to age, then Alzheimer's gets caught up in that.
Yeah.
You know, which is, so I'm 63. And I intend to age well. And I think it's really, you know, part of the thing is that we have to be comfortable. We have to learn how to honor people in this country who are aging. We have to embrace aging instead of running from aging. And that will bring Alzheimer's with it, right? It'll bring it along with us. So you're gonna get a chance now to ask either Freddie or Josh, both of whom are on the front lines, any question you want about what you can do, about your brain, about what's exciting, how to get involved in that registry. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Maybe you say your name.
My name is Barbara.
Barbara, hi Barbara.
Thank you. I have a question. I have a friend who is a caregiver, and I worry that she's not taking care of herself, beginning to show signs of burning out. And I'm wondering what I can do as someone who is not a professional, try to help her. How would I start that conversation? I know sometimes it can be difficult.
Do you want to answer that, Lisa?
It's really important. I would start with compassion. This is what love looks like with a friend. And that you come from that place that you're concerned. As a friend, it's really hard. I call it caregiver spin. When someone gets in so deep, it's almost like you become addicted to being needed. Yeah. And there is something that happens because you don't want to fail. But there's no winning. And I had to learn that the hard way. And I meet people every day. And we talk about this in support group. Encourage her to get into a support group if you can. Because we have to share. Or if we're so isolated and so lonely with this disease that it's dangerous.
Freddie, you work with families all the time. Thank you, Lisa. It's beautiful. Thank you.
So I'd say make an offer. What people generally say is, well, call me if you need anything. You know, no one ever calls and says I need anything. You know, so what you'd say is, you know, I'm really concerned. I see how much you're hard you're working. I'm really concerned about you. I think it would be great if you could go to support group, and I will stay here and watch your spouse for you when you go to support group, and I will be there every Monday night so you can go to the support group, because people can't go to the support group because who's going to take care of their loved one? So make an offer. You know, I will take him out to dinner or your sister, take the person out to dinner so you can go where you need to go. Make a concrete effort, and come up with something you can do that's reasonable for you that can give them some relief.
We at WHAM, we give out respite grants to caregivers, and it's usually like you're saying that they use it to get their hair done, to go to a doctor themselves, really basic things that we all take for granted, and just feeling like, okay, there's somebody that's watching I can get for a couple hours or I can get a day. I think the statistics are that we're all going to end up as a caregiver at some point in our lives. So communicating, learning, and supporting is that's really good suggestions. Go ahead.
So you mentioned diet and exercise were the best things to do, and taking the non-FDA approved supplements possibly.
Oh, I just said I do that.
You just do
I
that.
also
Okay.
and I do that. I actually have found like ashwagandha and magnesium very helpful for myself to sleep with. Mm-hmm. And I then take things that are like B12, methyl B12, the things where I had vitamin D, maybe some deficiency. But I do some other weird stuff too. So
weird is good. Weird can be good. But you had mentioned a low-fat diet, and there's been a lot of research about a ketogenic diet and a paleo diet where the really good fats, the avocados, the olive oils, the coconut oils, that actually support the brain health. Can you comment on that? They've been they've done a lot of work at the Cleveland
yes, there's
Clinic
a huge.
with that.
That's a great question because there's so much confusion on what should we eat.
So when I hear low fat, I'm like, okay, thank you.
And like everything, the answer is complicated. Are we talking about treating a loved one with Alzheimer's disease, or are we talking about a diet we adhere to try to maintain our brain health for when we get older? So there are some clinical trials being done of the ketogenic diet. There have been some compounds that are rapidly converted into ketone bodies. When we don't eat complex carbohydrates, our body thinks we're starving, even if we're eating a lot of high protein meals. And when that happens, we break down fat into an alternate energy source called ketone bodies that the brain can use as a source of energy. The person with Alzheimer's disease brain is not as good at using the traditional source of energy, glucose, as a person without Alzheimer's disease, so this led to the hypothesis maybe we should give a different form of energy. The results are not yet in, and the ketogenic diet is a difficult thing for a person with Alzheimer's disease to maintain.
But what about somebody who doesn't want to get Alzheimer's disease?
The long-term effects of the ketogenic diet are certainly something to talk to your doctor about before you begin doing it, because the liver and kidneys are working very hard to metabolize all those ketone bodies. We know that people use it to lose weight, and we know that ketones can gain access to the brain and be used as an energy source. I don't think it's, and Freddie will correct me, but I don't think it's well studied to know the long-term health implications of trying to stay in ketosis, which, again, is tricking your body into thinking you're starving. That is an important thing to talk about with your doctor before you would do that for any extended period of time.
And also maybe we could just address it with that intermittent fasting seems to be such a huge thing.
So I think
and women's bodies are also different with the intermittent fasting compared to men.
Right, so I think that's the other area in gerontology and aging. Intermittent fasting has become a very hot topic. Walter Longo at USC is a very big proponent of this. Part of it is that a lot of people, you're supposed to fast. While breakfast is called breakfast, it's break fast, because you're not supposed to eat after dinner and you're supposed to fast all night, But a lot of people, have their midnight snacks and they eat late, so they don't have this cycle. But the body's really made to have a fasting state for about 12 hours. And if you live in that state, then you kind of produce a little bit of this. Not totally ketogenic, but a kind of quasi-ketosis in a fasting state. And there is, there was many years ago, the biosphere, remember the biosphere, and people went and lived in this.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You know, and that was the whole thing of looking at, you know, a very low fat, low carb diet, and it was a fasting state, and they came out looking having lost weight and lost a lot of body fat, and their cognitive performances there were variable when they came out of that. So that led people to think that maybe this wasn't such a good thing to do for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So it's not known really. You know, we haven't put people into long-term trials. I mean, how many of you are going to sign up for a long-term trial of a ketogenic diet for 12 months and have your memory tested every couple of weeks? It's hard to find people who want to do that.
And you know, I was a little, so there's a very impressive literature about intermittent fasting, and it's used, the term should be defined, because some people mean, you know, I don't eat on Thursdays, and I call that intermittent fasting, and that is, I think, something different. There's overnight fasting, which Freddie is alluding to, where you leave a certain number of hours between dinner and breakfast, and I hear people calling out numbers, but
14
you know,
hours, 16
14
hours,
or 16
12.
are the two most common ones. And I remember when these papers first started coming out, and I thought, well, if you get people to stop eating Taco Bell at midnight, it's good for them. Eureka!
Or ice cream.
but the basic science is actually tremendously impressive. That and the Nobel Prize was given a few years ago for the discovery that every cell in the body has a clock. You know, our brain has a circadian clock that's reset by exposure to the sun. It turns out that every cell in the body has a circadian clock, and it's reset by our glucose levels. And so when we eat our meals really affects our whole body physiology. And there's a lot here, and it's going to take some years to really figure it out better, but it's a very interesting area of research. And
What do you mean there's a lot here?
There's a lot still to figure out about how best to utilize this to maintain health, including brain health. Now, there are a number of in terms of diet and intermittent fasting versus, you know, caloric restriction, for example. We know that if an animal eats only 60% of what it would normally eat, it lives 40% longer. I did a little bit of research on this when I was a graduate student. I really hated having to feed the animals who were being calorically restricted. They were tremendously unhappy rodents. And I would imagine humans trying to adhere to 60% of their normal caloric intake would, and there are societies of people who calorically restrict and try to lower their body weight to 60% of what it would otherwise be. So there's a lot of work still that needs to be done, but this is a very exciting area of research, and diet clearly matters.
That's why it's exciting, because this wasn't, you know, like when I started working, and you've been working much longer, no one was looking at diet. No one was looking at estrogen. No one was looking at menopause. So these are, or exercise, or sleep. So this is something I hope you will leave here excited about, and that everybody's own body, right, works differently. So I want to get somebody in the back. I mean, I know there's, go ahead, stand, there's tons of people. Or
we also have some questions from the other rooms.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I can't comment on a specific book, but you know, I can say that it's very easy for us to make recommendations around eating a healthy diet, getting these things that we all should strive to have in our diet on a regular basis. I think it's clear to me from the literature that not getting enough fish in our diet puts our brain at risk later in life. And we should strive to eat a lot of dark green leafy vegetables and eat a lot of fruits that are high in antioxidants. And similarly, you know, we shouldn't eat Taco Bell at midnight, as I joked about earlier, but you know, we have to really think about what we're putting in our diet and be careful about that. And it's pretty easy for anyone in our field to make a series of recommendations that are going to be good for our brain health.
I think one of the things that I've learned, and you can correct me as I go through is that everybody, what's good for you isn't good for you, which isn't good for you, and that this is a really important thing. So if you're reading a book, it might work great for you. You may feel like clear and great, and you give it to somebody else, and it's the exact opposite thing. So knowing your body, following your intuition, paying attention to what works for you is also, right, big
Yeah.
part of this.
Yeah, and I would even go a step further that, before you make any drastic changes in your diet, like, skipping eating on Thursdays or adding supplements or anything else that you're thinking about as a concerted effort to maintain your brain health, talk to a physician about it, to make sure it's a good idea for you and the medications that you take.
Right.
Supplements can interact with prescription drugs. So these are very careful medical decisions that should be made in partnership with a professional clinician.
Okay, great. A lot of questions. Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about antibody vaccines. I was just reading an article about that, and can you speak to that and talk about the research?
What is
I think it was
Can you
called endobody vaccine.
I've never heard of it. I don't know.
There's also a lot of stuff out there that no one's ever heard of, so
Well,
maybe.
it was actually a
I don't know.
doctor in New
I
York.
mean, I would
that's
say everybody needs to get their flu vaccine this time of year. That's like the main thing.
And I can say that we have tested vaccines
Oh.
as potential therapies for Alzheimer's disease. A remarkable paper just came out last week following people 14 years after they participated in a clinical trial of a vaccine and showing that even 14 years later their brain had the amyloid plaques removed from being vaccinated with an amyloid vaccine. Unfortunately, it did not slow the progression of their disease to severe dementia, and this was an autopsy study. So there's a lot of interest and excitement. That vaccine trial gave way to things that are still under investigation as potential therapies in the form of antibodies. We vaccinate people in hopes of making their body generate antibodies, and we can just generate antibodies against the beta amyloid protein, and many of those are still in development. That's some of the setbacks we've faced. They have not been effective in slowing the course of disease once people have dementia, but will they be adequate to stave off dementia in the future? We're eagerly awaiting the results of some clinical trials that'll begin to answer those questions.
All right, right here.
Hi, I have a three-part question, but I'll be quick. My name is Pauline, by the way. So I know that prevention is the most important thing, and I also have learned that Alzheimer's has increased so much over the last few decades. And I don't know when it was first diagnosed or how much it has increased, but I understand there's a parallel between the toxicity in our food and all of that. So I read that there was a study done on autopsies that were done on the brains of people that died of Alzheimer's, and the one common denominator they found was an increased level in aluminum. So is that true? And I know we have aluminum in deodorant and
Okay, great. Go
so
ahead.
many packaging.
So, because there is inflammation in the brain when you have Alzheimer's, there may be metals attracted to it. So finding deposits of metals in the brain of people with Alzheimer's doesn't mean that it caused the Alzheimer's. It is a sort of artifact in the autopsy. So just like you cannot, it's there, and we know it, but there are. It's not a cause. You can't, at least we don't believe it's a cause. In our petri dish models, when we put aluminum in, we don't, in the brains, the neurons don't start to behave like and develop Alzheimer's.
Yeah, this is debunked.
Yeah. Thank you.
There were some studies in the 1980s where some neuroscientists were injecting aluminum salts into the brains of rabbits to cause them to have seizures in an effort to study epilepsy. When they examined the brains of those rabbits, they saw what they thought were neurofibrillary tangles of the plaque and tangle variety associated with Alzheimer's disease. They had this eureka moment. It led to some hasty studies that confirmed this, and it took a long time, and we still get questions about it with great frequency to convince people that aluminum is not a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and it is not. And the other thing, I don't know if this was part two, but the parallel for the increase in Alzheimer's disease is actually a good one. It's that we're helping people live longer, healthier lives to the ages when the risk for Alzheimer's disease goes up exponentially, which is after age 65. And so for every 5 years we live after the age of 65, our risk of getting Alzheimer's disease doubles.
Jesus,
And-
hurry up, get the cure. I'm
So
like
I would also say
zeroing in.
So-
Oh my God.
Thank you. Good night. I'm going to get back to work.
Woo! Okay.
But I think an important thing is that Alzheimer's disease is an epidemic, not only because we're living longer, but because we have achieved so much else in medicine. You survive your breast cancer, at age 60, and then at age 85, you start to have degeneration of your brain. You survive the car accident and all the fractures because we have all this technology. All the things we've done in the last century to improve medical care have some unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences of many of these things is that the brain starts to change as we age. And some of those changes are degeneration of Alzheimer's and other dementing illnesses, Parkinson's disease. I mean, so you live long enough, something's going to happen to parts of your body. So unfortunately, we don't get to write our story. You don't get to choose unless you make an active choice sometime in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here.
Real quickly, and I'm very loud, so I'm afraid of this. I'm blessed with a 96-year-old mother who's mentally and physically healthy. But I have a
What's your secret?
I haven't gotten it. She is not even wrinkled. But what does the role of atrophy of the brain play with Alzheimer's? Because as we mature, for most of you, what is the role of atrophy of the brain? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, certainly. So atrophy means shrinkage, and in Alzheimer's disease, the brain does shrink. And this is a neurodegenerative condition, so brain cells are dying eventually as a result of this disease. And when we lose brain cells, the volume of especially parts of the brain that are important to memory and decision making and language, we can see shrinkage on an MRI or a CT scan. And maybe more importantly, when cells are in the process of dying and then die, we're losing the connections between cells, or what we call synapses. And this is how our brain functions. And so when we have atrophy in parts of the brain that are important to memory, and we lose connections between that part of the brain and other parts of the brain, we experience things like short-term memory problems as a result. Importantly, not everyone who gets Alzheimer's disease will show dramatic atrophy of the brain in the early stages, but ultimately it will affect every brain.
I think one. Okay, jump. We have only, I guess, one more. I'm sorry. We have. Go ahead. I don't
Try.
think so.
I think she's asking about. That's a very rare condition. Okay, but so yeah, so in general, so cerebral spinal fluid comes up from our spine and bathes our brain. Our brain sits in this fluid, and what we learned, I think. Josh may have said earlier about sleep. When we are sleeping is when the cerebral spinal fluid is most active. It's kind of like the washing machine, and it
trash collector.
The trash collector clears out the garbage. And so if you don't get enough sleep, then the garbage accumulates. I mean, the other side of this is why sleep deprivation is a kind of torture, because proteins and things build up in the brain and people start to have psychosis and things. So sleep is very important in maintaining brain health and in clearing out the results of all the work the brain's been doing during the day. The other part is that we can now, in a cerebral spinal fluid, measure the contents of some of the markers for some of these diseases. So just like you can check your blood sugar out of your in a blood test, or your cholesterol in a blood test, you can look and find rates of amyloid and tau proteins in the cerebrospinal fluid that can be early markers of Alzheimer's disease. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and get a test, but it is one of the tests that is being done in some of the in the research trials in people who don't have memory problems yet, but who may be on the road to those problems, to find the early markers of them, and then see if we can change that with interventions with clinical trials.
So one of the, can we keep, there's so many other questions. Go ahead. Okay, one or two more, and then it's your guys' time. Well, it's their time, so.
Hi, I want to hear more about rheumatoid arthritis and Alzheimer's, because that's the first time I've ever heard anything good about rheumatoid arthritis.
The question is about the connection between rheumatoid arthritis and Alzheimer's, and she was saying that's the first time she's ever heard anything good about rheumatoid arthritis.
So should I have my doctor put me back on prednisone?
No, no, not advocating that. I think it's a clue as to the inflammation piece of this disease. That's all I was trying to explain. It's a clue. It's a very, what's going on in the brain is complex, and we're understanding more and more parts of that. And the inflammatory part of it, we now understand from studies of other diseases.
But you can join a trial and find out. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Please.
Bring it on.
I had a one-word answer.
All the time.
He's so funny, Josh, tonight. Get him out of that lab and he's out of control.
I was drinking on the 405. Alcohol, too much alcohol is bad for your brain. Chronic alcoholism causes a syndrome called Korsakoff-Wernicke syndrome. It attacks the memory centers of the brain and produces a dementia-like syndrome. Other studies find that alcohol in moderation is actually associated with reduced risk for late-life cognitive problems and dementia. It depends on the study. It's generally defined as anywhere from 3 drinks a week to a drink a day, depending on the study. All things in moderation, I guess.
What about there's also just sugar, since we're on to one word, sugar.
Sugar. Well, I'll just say so that as we've had a rise in obesity and a rise in the diseases related to obesity, principally diabetes, we've had a rise in Alzheimer's disease. Now, you can draw conclusions from that, but we also know that people who are diabetics are much more likely to have cognitive impairment and to have changes in their brain, both related to Alzheimer's disease and to vascular circulatory problems. So, if there's any reason to motivate people to keep their weight normal, maybe it's Alzheimer's disease, because getting people to lose weight or maintain normal weight, because we want to prevent heart attacks, we want to prevent strokes, we want to prevent diabetes, doesn't seem to be a motivating factor if you just walk around the community. But maybe preventing your brain from deteriorating will motivate people to think about having to maintain normal weight. And so I think that's one of the messages.
What do you think is the best advice? Because so many people I talk to say, it's so hard for me to even think about my brain health. When you don't look in the mirror and see your brain, it's hard for people, I think, to think about how do I make brain health real to me. Like, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh my God, a wrinkle. Oh my God, my arms are fat. Oh my God, blah, blah. Right? Great. So you do something, but you can't see your brain. So do you have anything for...
I think that Alzheimer's disease is the most feared disease among older adults. Yeah. And so I think that we have to embrace people's fears. We certainly have to change stigma, and we have to do our best to educate people through events like this one about keeping brain health top of mind and doing these things to try to lower our risk as much as possible and support research to try to take us the rest of the way. We've done a number of studies investigating whether people want to know whether they're going to someday get Alzheimer's disease. And overwhelmingly, the majority of people say, you know, yeah, I want to know. If there's a blood test for Alzheimer's disease, I want to take it. If there's a brain scan, I want to have that scan. And we're not there yet, but our studies and other studies around the world say people are concerned about this, and though there are certainly people who have the right to not know and don't want to know, we find that most people who are, and you know, they may be the people motivated to be in my studies, but most people want to know, and you know, I think our job is to give them the tools to do everything they can.
Right. So when you for many years, this goes back 30, 40 years, if you ask people as they age what's their biggest fears, they say they don't want to be dependent on others. They want to be able to, I want to still be able to take care of myself. I don't want to be dependent on others. Well, we know that Alzheimer's leads to being dependent on others. So if looking in the mirror and looking at and say, I don't want to be dependent on others, leads you to make changes so that you aren't dependent on others, then that's a change that will hopefully stave off Alzheimer's disease.
Beautiful. Well, I know we have so many ongoing questions, and Josh and Freddie have given us their expertise and their time, and sat in traffic to be here. So I want to thank you both so much. And I hope, I think that's a really good concrete piece of advice of looking in the mirror and saying, I want to age well, I want to age independently, I want to age with myself intact, right? And so what can I do today? We talked a lot about sleep, we talked about diet, we talked about exercise. Social connection is another big thing that I would like to leave you with. Really important to stay connected in your community, to learn something new, to stay curious. If you know people who are living alone, reach out to them. We can do a better job of building communities. I know even though we're all separated, there's a lot of exciting therapy going on in places like this. There's art therapy, there's music therapy, there's equine therapy. There's a lot of stuff. If you have a loved one who is suffering from Alzheimer's, you can get involved in what they're eating, what they're doing. There's a lot of kind of music is really kind of exciting. So these are things that are kind of new. There's a lot of very dedicated people in this space, but I hope that we also leave you with the idea that each person in this room can be an advocate to change this disease. You can give money, you can give time, you can participate in a trial, you can help someone who's struggling with someone who's got a loved one. I say to my kids all the time, you know, you can, it's like elder sit, you know, you can go, I hate that word elder, but you can go and, you know, spend time. I saw a video yesterday that I posted of a little boy going to homes like this and just hugging people. He went and hugged his mother, and he did it, and it changed people's lives. So everybody here has a gift. Everybody here can be an advocate. Everybody here can vote on this issue, and everybody can do something about it. And I hope that you're inspired to do that. I hope we've taken some of the fear out of this disease and brought you some empowerment and some inspiration, because that's really what I'm hopeful. And there are so many really smart, talented people working 24 hours in labs that you never see, trying to help us figure out what we can do to wipe out this mind-blowing disease, and these are two of them. So Josh and Freddie, thank you so much. Tanya, thank you.
I just wanted to personally thank Maria. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This was a magical evening. And thank you, Dr. Grill, and thank you, Freddie.
I just want to also say thank you to all the caregivers I met who are working here, are just extraordinary nurses, head of nursing. This is also a line of work. We need, Josh mentioned, I'm doing a big task force for the governor. We need more caregivers. It's a fast-growing industry business, so we need more people. We met the chefs here who are really instrumental in the diets of people as they age. So this takes a village, it takes a neighborhood, it takes a community. You don't ask your political persuasion. But it's really, I've also said that I've seen the greatest acts of love in the caregiving space, for what like Lisa was talking about. I always say to my kids, if you want to see what love looks like, don't go to the movies, go to a caregiving place, because that's the real deal, right?
It is.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And thank you to everybody joining us this evening. We just have one special opportunity from the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, and I wanted to introduce Sandy, and she's just going to share a few
And I want to
words.
thank Sandy Gleistein and Aaron Stein, who work at the Women's Alzheimer's Movement and work tirelessly 24/7 on this and other stuff.
Tanya, you don't get to leave. I have to just say one thing. This woman doesn't get to leave the stage without a big thank you from the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. I think you can see what she is creating here in your community. And I think it's incredibly valuable. I know how hard you've worked. I know these nights, these kinds of events take so much work and so much effort, a real commitment. And thank you to you and to Steve. I'm sorry Dan can't be with us tonight. Give him our best. But we are incredibly grateful to all of you. And I really want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. On a more, on a really hopeful note, I just have one thing to say. You guys had 1 million questions, and I have a great solution for where you can get them answered. We have, at the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, has our big fundraiser. It's called Move for Minds. You have things in your gift bags to remind you of the name. We're going to sign people up tonight. But this is a opportunity. It's like tonight, except instead of 2 amazing, brilliant doctors and researchers, you're going to have 25 scientists and doctors available to answer your questions, be there for you. It's our fundraiser. It's really important to get people involved. You wanted an opportunity. If you want an opportunity to be heard and be an activist and an advocate for this disease, please sign up for Move for Minds. It's an incredible experience. We do it once a year. This year it happens to be in Los Angeles. It's going to be incredible. There's a fitness element. Not everybody wants to participate in the fitness element, but there are so many other incredible things, like meeting doctors like Josh and Freddie and so many others, Dean Ornish, so many incredible doctors who are going to be visiting with us. And there's a bookstore, and there are authors and chefs and famous people and not so famous people. But there's everything there. It's an incredible, incredible day for you to get your questions answered. And we're sorry we didn't have more time tonight, but I do promise you, if you come to Move for Minds, you will have your questions answered. It is Saturday, November 2nd. We are doing one in the morning from 8 to 12 noon and one session from 2 to 6. And all of those doctors and scientists are going to be part of our day. We hope you'll be there. You seem like a very hungry crowd for information, inspiration, education. That's what we can offer you. So please sign up tonight. We have people in every room. We have people as you go out the door. Sign up for Move for Minds. It's critical for us to be able to support the work that people like Josh and Freddie are doing. Unless people, you won't get the answers you're looking for. You will not protect your brains if you don't help support the work that is taking place in these labs. So it is incumbent on all of us to help support their work. And I encourage you to do it. I really think it's the most critical thing we can do is support our doctors, our researchers, and then people like all of us advocates can get involved. As Maria said, get involved, get off your you-know-what, and be part of the solution. And we welcome you. We're going to sign you up as you go out the door. Please join us. Yeah, okay. As Maria said, you're not getting out of here. That's right. So we need your help. We go around the country having these kinds of evenings. We can't do this work without your support. Thank God for Alicia and Dolores Ballard, because they have been so supportive of our organization. So become involved. Get involved. Join us. See you at Move for Minds.